Mastering the mind. Why Buddhism teaches that your thoughts are your worst enemy. Welcome to Buddhist Stories, your sanctuary for discovering the deep teachings of Buddhism that offer timeless wisdom for modern life. In today's video, we will dive into one of the most profound concepts of Buddhist philosophy: why your mind might actually be your worst enemy. But before we begin, let me ask you this. Have you ever thought that your mind might be the root of all your struggles? What if I told you that the constant chatter, the relentless thoughts that swirl in your head, are not just harmless musings, but could actually be trapping you in cycles of stress, anxiety, and self-doubt? Is it possible that the greatest battles you face are caused by the pressures from your job, relationships, or the world around you, but by the very thoughts you entertain in your own mind? This is a question that might surprise you. Many of us spend our days focused on external problems, unaware that it is our mind, our own thinking, that often keeps us trapped in the storms of regret and fear. In this video, we'll uncover how Buddhism teaches us to understand and transform the mind, showing us that it's not the external world that makes us suffer, but the way we respond to it with our mental patterns. We'll explore how mindfulness, awareness, and non-attachment can set us free, offering a way to break free from the chains of our own thoughts. But here's a challenge for you. How often do you feel that your mind controls you, rather than the other way around? Do you think you are the master of your thoughts? Or do your thoughts often dictate your actions and emotions? Here's your chance to reflect and engage with us. Type 1 in the comments if you believe your mind controls you more often than not. Or type 2 if you feel that you have mastered your mind and it no longer holds you captive. Your responses will help us explore deeper into how the mind works, and whether we can indeed free ourselves from its grip. By the end of this video, you may see things differently, and that's a promise. So, how does the mind become an enemy? And more importantly, how can we reclaim the peace that is naturally ours? Let's begin by uncovering what Buddhism teaches about this often unnoticed yet powerful source of suffering, the mind. Stay with us as we explore the path to true liberation from the mind's control, one thought at a time. Chapter 1. The Mind, a Restless Prison. The human mind is an extraordinary tool, capable of great creativity, deep insight, and profound understanding. But for many, it does not serve as a steady guide to wisdom. Rather, it often behaves more like a restless prisoner. It traps us within a cage of our own making, spinning endless stories, creating fears and doubts, and offering no respite from the constant noise. To understand this better, imagine a small bird trapped inside a cage it built with its own feathers. The bird flaps its wings frantically, trying to escape, but the very bars it struggles against are made of its own construction. This image is a perfect reflection of our minds. We, too, are trapped by our thoughts, emotions, and mental habits, unable to see that we are the ones who have built the cage in the first place. In Buddhist teachings, the mind is often compared to a turbulent ocean. The surface is churned by waves of worry, regret, anxiety, and endless thoughts. Yet, beneath these chaotic waves, there is stillness, a deep calmness untouched by the surface turmoil. The Buddha once described the mind as a fish thrown from the water onto dry land, thrashing, struggling, and gasping for stability. Similarly, our minds are constantly moving, darting from one thought to the next, never finding the peace and stillness we so desperately crave. Most of us are familiar with the experience of waking up in the morning only to find our minds racing before we even open our eyes. We replay past mistakes, anxiety over the tasks of the day ahead, and spin countless scenarios about what might go wrong. This mental storm often begins before our feet even touch the ground. And once it starts, it rarely lets up. We are so accustomed to the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that we don't even realize how much they control us. The Buddha described the mind as a flame that flickers in the wind, never still, always searching for something to cling to, yet finding nothing stable to hold on to. This brings us to a crucial point in Buddhist philosophy. Our minds are constantly seeking something to grasp, but there is nothing lasting for the mind to hold on to. This is a source of immense suffering. We think that if we can just hold on to the right thought, the right idea, or the right outcome, we will find peace. But peace is not found in the mind's restlessness. It is found in releasing the need to control it. Let me share a story from the Buddha's teachings that highlights this truth. One day, the Buddha asked his disciple Ananda, "Where is your mind?" Ananda, a learned and devoted disciple, was unsure how to answer. He first pointed to his head, then to his chest. The Buddha smiled and gently replied, "The mind is neither here nor there, it flickers like a flame." This metaphor captures the essence of the mind's restless nature. It is not a solid, fixed entity, but something that is always in motion, always shifting from one thought to another. It is elusive and difficult to catch, like a flame flickering in the wind. What the Buddha was teaching Ananda, and what he teaches all of us, is that the mind is not something we can easily control or pin down. It is a process, a flow, constantly moving, never fully at rest. And when we try to control it or force it into stillness, we only end up amplifying its restlessness. At this point, you may wonder, how does this affect my daily life? What does this have to do with my peace of mind? The answer lies in how we relate to our thoughts. Most of us are not aware of the constant flow of thoughts that occupy our minds. We wake up, and our minds immediately begin their chatter. We are not aware that much of this is not a reflection of reality, but a mental construct, shaped by our past experiences, our fears, and our desires. In fact, one of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is that the mind does not reflect reality directly. Instead, it distorts it. Our thoughts and emotions are like lenses through which we view the world. These lenses are often clouded by past experiences, biases, and desires. When we see the world through these distorted lenses, we cannot see things as they truly are. This is why the Buddha taught that ignorance is the root of all suffering. We suffer not because of what is happening around us, but because of the way we perceive it through the filter of our minds. Imagine a man walking through a forest at night. He is carrying a lamp, and as he walks, he notices a rope lying on the ground. In the dark, his mind tells him that it is a snake. He becomes fearful, imagining the snake will bite him. But when he shines his lamp on the rope, he sees clearly that it is not a snake at all. The fear vanishes, and the danger no longer exists. This story illustrates how our minds distort reality, causing us to react to situations that are not inherently dangerous. Just like the man in the dark, we often react to our thoughts as if they are true, when in fact they are simply projections of our mind. The Buddha teaches us that the way to peace is not by avoiding thoughts, or trying to stop them, but by seeing them for what they truly are: transient, fleeting, and not ultimately real. One of the ways we can begin to do this is through the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of observing our thoughts, emotions, and experiences without attachment or judgment. By becoming aware of our mental habits, we begin to see how they shape our reality and distort our perceptions. we can begin to step back from our thoughts and see them as they are passing phenomena, not permanent truths. Take a moment to consider this. Have you ever found yourself replaying a conversation in your head, long after it has ended, thinking of all the things you should have said or could have said differently? Or perhaps you found yourself anxious about an upcoming event, imagining all the worst-case scenarios, even though nothing has happened yet? These are perfect examples of how our minds create suffering by dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. The Buddha teaches us that the only way to find true peace is by learning to live in the present moment, free from the pull of past regrets and future anxieties. A simple way to practice mindfulness is through meditation. Meditation helps us cultivate the ability to observe our thoughts without getting caught up in them. We learn to watch them arise and pass away, like clouds drifting across the sky. This practice allows us to gain a sense of detachment from our thoughts, so that they no longer control us. We can begin to see that we are not our thoughts, but the one who observes them. And as we become more aware of our mental patterns, we start to experience greater peace and clarity. The Buddha's teachings on the mind are profound, yet they are also practical. They offer us a path to freedom from the suffering caused by our own thoughts. By observing the mind without judgment, we begin to create space between ourselves and our thoughts. This space is where true peace resides. It is a space where we can find stillness, even in the midst of the storm. At this moment, I invite you to take a deep breath. Close your eyes and simply observe your thoughts. Don't try to change them. Don't try to control them, just observe them as they come and go. Notice how they arise, stay for a while, and then fade away. With practice, you will begin to realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the one who is aware of them. And in that awareness, you will find a peace that is always present, no matter how turbulent the mind may seem. This is the path to liberation from the restless mind. It is not a path that requires us to fight with our thoughts or suppress them, but rather to see them for what they are, impermanent and fleeting. When we stop identifying with our thoughts, we are free to experience the present moment as it truly is, without the distortions of the past or the fears of the future. So, I ask you now, are you ready to observe your mind with greater awareness? Are you ready to step back from the noise and find the stillness that is always there, waiting for you? If you are, then I invite you to take a step forward on this path of mindfulness. Start today by simply noticing your thoughts, without judgment or attachment. And in that noticing, you will begin to experience the peace that the Buddha taught was always within you. Chapter 2, The Enemy Within. The mind, an exceptional tool capable of great insight and wisdom, often turns against us, becoming our most formidable adversary. At first glance, it may seem that the mind is just a tool we use to navigate through life. We assume that it functions as a trusted guide, helping us make decisions, solve problems, and gain understanding. However, the Buddha taught that, more often than not, the mind is our greatest enemy. It is not a faithful servant but a restless, wandering force that distorts reality, fueling fear, anxiety, and insecurity. In Buddhist philosophy, we are taught that the mind's primary goal is to protect us, to keep us safe. Yet, this instinct often goes astray, creating unnecessary suffering. The Buddha observed that the mind does not simply respond to reality, but rather constructs its own version of the world, a version that is often fraught with exaggerations, distortions, and assumptions. And it is in these moments of mental turbulence, when we allow the mind to run unchecked, that we are most susceptible to suffering. Imagine this familiar scenario. You are sitting at home, enjoying a quiet moment, perhaps with a cup of tea or reading a book. For a moment, everything is calm. Then, suddenly, the mind stirs. A thought arises, perhaps a memory from the past, an old regret, or a worry about the future. Before you know it, your mind has created a storm, one that was never there to begin with. Your heart races, your chest tightens, and you feel the familiar pangs of anxiety. Though nothing in your external environment has changed, your mind has created a crisis. This is the power of the mind. It can transform a peaceful moment into a moment of turmoil. Not because of external events, but because of how the mind interprets them. The mind's craving, a source of suffering. The Buddhist teachings point to a fundamental truth. All suffering comes from craving. The mind is perpetually chasing after comfort, safety, and certainty. It clings to what it knows and resists anything that challenges its sense of control. Yet, when the mind cannot find these things, it creates problems to fill the void. It fabricates imaginary dangers, drags up past regrets, and conjures up anxieties about the future, none of which are based in the present reality. Take, for instance, a simple situation. You wave to a friend on the street, but they do not wave back. Immediately, your mind leaps to conclusions. Did I offend them? Are they angry with me? Did I say something wrong? Before long, the mind has spun an entire narrative of doubt and worry, convincing you of something that is not true. In reality, your friend may simply have been distracted or preoccupied, and there was no ill intent whatsoever. But the mind, in its constant quest for certainty, creates a story, an unnecessary drama that causes distress. This is a classic example of how the mind often makes mountains out of molehills. It creates suffering by projecting fears, doubts, and insecurities where none exist. It interprets reality through the lens of past experiences, fears, and desires. The Buddha warned us of this tendency, teaching that our worst enemy is not external circumstances, but the mental habits that shape our perception of the world. A story of the mind's illusion. To better understand this concept, let me share with you a story from the Buddhist teachings. There was once a man who was traveling through a dense forest. As he walked along the path, he suddenly stumbled upon a rope lying across the ground. In the dark of the night, the man mistakenly took the rope for a snake. His heart raced, and fear gripped him. He jumped back, imagining that the snake might bite him. His mind created a vivid story, convincing him that he was in grave danger. But when the man finally shone his lantern on the rope, he realized the truth. It was nothing more than an ordinary rope. The fear vanished as soon as he saw the situation clearly. This story beautifully illustrates how our minds often misinterpret situations, creating fear where none exists. The rope, harmless in reality, became a source of great terror simply because the man's mind misperceived it. Similarly, we often make the mistake of thinking that our fears are based on reality when, in fact, they are projections of our mind. We worry about things that may never happen, regret actions that are long past, and create stories that add unnecessary layers of suffering to our lives. The Buddha taught that, just like the man in the story, we must shine the light of awareness on our thoughts. Only then can we see the true nature of our fears and anxieties. By recognizing that they are illusions created by the mind, we can begin to release them. This is the first step toward freedom, understanding that the mind's stories are not reality, but merely passing clouds. The nature of craving and attachment. The mind's craving for safety, certainty, and control leads us to attachment. We attach to thoughts, to opinions, to the way things should be. We become so wrapped up in our mental constructs that we forget the fluid nature of reality. Things are always changing. But the mind clings to the belief that it can control or hold on to something permanent. In Buddhism, attachment is seen as one of the root causes of suffering. We attach to things, people, ideas, and experiences because we believe they will bring us lasting happiness. But in doing so, we create an inner conflict. The world is constantly in flux, and nothing can remain the same forever. When we try to hold on to something that is impermanent, we inevitably experience disappointment, loss, and frustration. The Buddha taught that attachment is like grasping a burning coal. The more tightly you hold onto it, the more it burns you. Likewise, the more we cling to thoughts, feelings, or outcomes, the more we suffer. The way to end suffering, according to the Buddha, is to practice non-attachment, not by rejecting or avoiding life, but by accepting things as they are, without trying to control them. A real-life example. The monk and the river. Let me share a simple yet profound story to illustrate the power of non-attachment. There was once a monk who lived in a quiet monastery near a river. One day, he and his fellow monks were crossing a bridge over the river, when they encountered a woman who was struggling to cross because of the strong current. The woman asked for help, and without hesitation, the monk lifted her and carried her across to the other side. After the encounter, the monk continued on his way. But his fellow monks were shocked. In their tradition, physical contact with women was considered taboo. They scolded the monk for what he had done. The monk, with great calm, simply said, "I left the woman on the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her?" This story teaches us an important lesson about attachment. The monk did not allow himself to be burdened by the judgment of others or by the rules that governed his actions. He acted in the moment, out of compassion. And once the situation was resolved, he let it go. His mind was not burdened by regret, guilt, or worry about how others might perceive him. He did not cling to the past action, nor did he fear the future consequences. He simply let go, and in doing so, he freed himself from unnecessary suffering. Chapter 3, The Power of Awareness. The mind is a curious thing. It is both our greatest ally and our worst enemy, depending on how we engage with it. One of the central teachings of Buddhism is the power of awareness. It is not about controlling our mind or silencing it, but rather about understanding it and observing it with clarity. Once we begin to see our thoughts for what they truly are, fleeting and transient, we can begin the process of liberation from the chains of mental suffering. This path of mindfulness and awareness allows us to find peace in the midst of the chaos of our minds. Imagine, for a moment, that you are sitting by a serene river, watching the water flow gently by. The water is clear and tranquil, but ripples spread across the surface, caused by the wind or perhaps a small pebble. Some of the ripples are large, dark, and heavy, while others are small and fleeting, disappearing almost as soon as they appear. The ripples are constantly moving, changing, and dissolving into the water. Our thoughts are much the same. They arise, stay for a moment, and then pass away. But only if we don't grab onto them. The ripples of the mind, our thoughts, are impermanent, constantly shifting. But we often make the mistake of identifying with them. When we cling to our thoughts, believing they define who we are, we create suffering. The mind is like a restless stream, and if we try to control it or hold onto it, we will only become exhausted, like trying to grasp water with our bare hands. But if we step back and simply observe the water without trying to control it or cling to it, we can appreciate its natural flow. Similarly, when we observe our thoughts without attachment, we can find peace amidst the mental turbulence. This process of mindful observation is the core of Buddhist practice. It is about cultivating a deep awareness of our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, without judgment. Mindfulness teaches us that we are not our thoughts. We are not the fears, regrets, or desires that arise in our minds. Instead, we are the ones who observe them. In this space of observation, we find freedom. The nature of thoughts. Fleeting and impermanent. In Buddhist philosophy, the mind is often compared to a vast, turbulent ocean. The surface of the water is constantly disturbed by waves. Yet beneath the surface, there is stillness. Our thoughts are like these waves. Sometimes they are large and overwhelming. Other times small and quiet. But just as the ocean's waves eventually dissolve back into the water, our thoughts, too, are transient. They come and go, and if we don't attach ourselves to them, they fade away naturally. This is where mindfulness becomes crucial. When we observe our thoughts without judgment or attachment, we begin to realize that they are not permanent. They do not define us. Instead, they are temporary phenomena, arising and passing away in the mind. By recognizing the impermanence of our thoughts, we can begin to release our attachment to them. And in this release, we find peace. A beautiful Buddhist story comes to mind that illustrates this point. Once, a monk came to the Buddha, deeply troubled by the constant stream of anxious thoughts that dominated his mind. He was unable to find peace, as his mind seemed always filled with worry and distraction. He asked the Buddha how he could silence these thoughts. The Buddha, instead of offering techniques to suppress the thoughts, simply said, "See them for what they are." Imagine, for a moment, being in a dark room, uncertain of what you are seeing. In the dim light, you might mistake a rope for a snake. Your mind would fill with fear, imagining danger where none exists. But when the light is turned on, you realize the rope is harmless. The fear dissipates as soon as you see the situation clearly. Similarly, the Buddha advised the monk to simply observe his thoughts with awareness, not to suppress them, but to see them for what they truly were, just passing phenomena in the mind. When we shine the light of awareness on our thoughts, we can see that they are not dangerous, nor are they inherently true. They are just thoughts, and like the ripples on the river, they will eventually disappear on their own. The importance of observation without attachment. This act of observing our thoughts without attachment is the first step toward liberation. The Buddha often taught that we should not try to control the mind, but rather to understand it. The mind is a powerful tool, but when it is not understood, it can lead us into suffering. We suffer when we cling to thoughts, when we mistake them for reality, and when we identify with them. But when we simply observe our thoughts, without judgment or attachment, we begin to realize that they are not who we are. In Buddhist meditation practices, this is often referred to as witnessing the mind. We sit quietly and observe the flow of thoughts, emotions, and sensations that arise in our consciousness. We do not try to change them or push them away. We simply observe them, acknowledging their presence without becoming involved in them. This practice helps us to create space between ourselves and our thoughts. We begin to see that we are not the thoughts themselves, but the awareness that observes them. This shift in perspective is profound. When we identify with our thoughts, we become entangled in them. We become anxious about the future, regretful of the past, or obsessed with our desires. But when we step back and observe our thoughts, we can detach from them. We no longer feel the need to control them. because we realize that they are not permanent, and they do not define us. We begin to experience a sense of freedom from the constant pull of our thoughts and emotions. The story of the wise monk. Let me share another story that illustrates the power of awareness and detachment. There was once a wise monk who lived in a small village. He was known for his calm demeanor and deep insight into the nature of the mind. One day, a troubled man came to the monk seeking advice. The man was consumed by anger and resentment towards someone who had wronged him. He could not let go of his bitterness, and it was eating away at him. The monk listened to the man's troubles and then said, "Let me show you something." He took the man to a nearby lake and asked him to pick up a small rock. The monk instructed the man to hold the rock tightly in his hand. "Now," said the monk, "hold the rock for as long as you can." The man held the rock tightly, feeling the weight in his hand. After a few minutes, his hand began to ache. "It's getting harder to hold," he said. The monk nodded. "The longer you hold onto the rock, the more it will hurt," he explained. "But if you let it go, the pain will cease." The monk continued, "Your anger is like this rock. The more you hold onto it, the more it hurts. But if you let it go, the pain will disappear. Just as you can choose to release the rock, you can choose to release your anger. It is not a part of you. It is a thought that arises. And like all thoughts, it will pass if you allow it to." This simple lesson illustrates the power of letting go. The man's suffering was caused by his attachment to the anger and resentment in his mind. By holding onto it, he was creating unnecessary pain for himself. But when he realized that he could release the anger, the pain disappeared. In the same way, our thoughts can create suffering when we hold onto them. But when we release them, when we let go of our attachment to them, they lose their power over us. How to cultivate awareness in daily life. So how can we cultivate awareness in our daily lives? The practice of mindfulness is essential. Mindfulness is the art of being fully present in each moment, without judgment or distraction. It is about observing the world around us, as well as our own thoughts and feelings, with a sense of openness and acceptance. To practice mindfulness, begin by setting aside a few minutes each day to sit quietly and observe your breath. As you breathe in and out, simply notice the sensations in your body, the thoughts that arise, and the emotions that come and go. Do not try to change anything. Just observe. If your mind wanders, gently bring your attention back to your breath, without judgment. In time, you can extend this practice to your daily activities. Whether you are eating, walking, or talking to someone, bring your full awareness to the present moment. When you find yourself becoming lost in thought or caught up in worry, simply observe the thought and let it go. Remember, thoughts are not permanent. They are like clouds in the sky, sometimes dark and heavy, sometimes light and fleeting, but they will always pass. By cultivating mindfulness and awareness, we can begin to break free from the grip of our thoughts. We can step back from the storm of the mind and find peace in the stillness that lies beneath. The more we practice mindfulness, the more we will experience a deep sense of freedom from the constant chatter of the mind, freedom from attachment, and freedom from suffering. Call to action. As you reflect on these teachings, I encourage you to begin your own practice of mindfulness. Start by observing your thoughts with awareness. Don't try to control them, but simply notice them as they arise and pass away. Remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. In this space of awareness, you will find the peace that the Buddha spoke of, a peace that is always present, waiting for you to discover it. Take a moment right now to reflect. What thoughts are you holding on to? What mental patterns are causing you suffering? Can you release them? Begin today, and notice how your relationship with your mind begins to shift. In doing so, you will take the first step toward freedom. For Chapter 4, Taming the Mind Through Non-Attachment. In the quest for true peace, the Buddhist teachings emphasize one crucial principle: non-attachment. This concept is at the heart of Buddhist philosophy and spiritual practice, yet it is often misunderstood. We live in a world that thrives on attachment, where we are taught to hold on to possessions, relationships, and even beliefs. We are constantly told that we must hold tightly to what we value, that we must defend our opinions, and that success is the result of our ability to cling to the things we desire. But the Buddha taught us something radically different. True freedom comes not from holding on, but from letting go. Attachment as the source of suffering. Attachment, in its simplest form, is the act of clinging to something, whether it is a material possession, an opinion, a person, or even an emotion. At first, attachment may seem harmless. After all, we are attached to things that we love, that bring us comfort, or that give us a sense of security. But the Buddha warned that attachment creates suffering because it traps us in the illusion of control. We become obsessed with the idea that we can control our lives, our relationships, or our environment. We attach ourselves to ideas of how things should be, how people should behave, and how life should unfold. In doing so, we create a constant struggle against the impermanence of life. Everything in this world is subject to change. People change, circumstances change, and even our own bodies change. Yet, when we cling to the illusion of permanence, we experience distress when things do not go as planned. This distress arises because we are unwilling to accept the inherent impermanence of life. We think that by holding on, we can preserve things in a way that suits our desires. But in reality, the more we cling, the more we suffer. The Buddha compared attachment to a burning coal. If you grasp a hot coal with your bare hands, the more you hold on, the more it burns. Similarly, the more we cling to things, the more we suffer. The key to freeing ourselves from this suffering lies in understanding the true nature of attachment and, more importantly, learning to let go. The power of non-attachment. True freedom, according to the Buddha, does not come from forcing ourselves to stop desiring, but from understanding the nature of attachment itself. Non-attachment is not about rejecting life or withdrawing from the world. It is not about suppressing our desires or emotions, but about releasing our grip on them. When we learn to observe our thoughts, feelings, and desires without identifying with them, we can free ourselves from their hold. We can experience life fully, without being enslaved by it. This concept of non-attachment can be difficult to understand, especially in a world that constantly encourages us to hold on to things. We are told to be ambitious, to strive for success, and to build a life that reflects our desires. But the Buddha's teachings suggest that this pursuit is the root cause of our dissatisfaction. When we focus too much on the things we want, whether they are material possessions, social approval, or even the approval of our own minds, we become trapped in a cycle of craving. We crave more, we strive for more, and in doing so, we become increasingly dissatisfied. The moment we achieve one goal, another one arises. This never-ending cycle of craving and striving is what keeps us bound in suffering. Non-attachment does not mean that we abandon our responsibilities or stop caring about others. It means that we are not attached to the outcome. We act with compassion, but we do not cling to the results. We pursue our goals, but we do not allow ourselves to be defined by them. When we let go of our attachment to outcomes, we open ourselves to the possibility of peace, regardless of what the world throws our way. A story of non-attachment. The Buddha's encounter with anger. The Buddha often used stories to illustrate his teachings. And one of the most profound stories about non-attachment comes from an encounter he had with a man who was full of anger and resentment. One day, a man approached the Buddha, filled with rage. He insulted the Buddha in the harshest terms, hoping to provoke a response. The Buddha, however, did not react in anger. He remained calm and composed. The man, taken aback by the Buddha's peaceful demeanor, demanded an explanation. "Why do you not respond to me?" the man asked. "Do you not care about my words?" The Buddha, with his usual calm, replied with a question. "If someone offers you a gift, but you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man, confused, answered, "To the one who offered it." The Buddha smiled and said, "Then I do not accept your anger, and it remains with you?" This simple exchange is a powerful illustration of the Buddha's teachings on non-attachment. The man's anger was like a gift that he offered to the Buddha. But the Buddha, instead of accepting the gift, chose to leave it with the man. He did not allow himself to be caught up in the negative emotions the man was trying to impose on him. This story teaches us that when we do not accept the mind's negative emotions, whether they are anger, resentment, or fear, we free ourselves from their grip. The Buddha's response also teaches us that our emotions are not permanent. They are like passing clouds in a sky, sometimes dark and heavy, other times light and fleeting. But when we hold on to them, we give them power over us. By not accepting the gift of anger, the Buddha demonstrates that we can choose to remain detached from our emotions, without allowing them to define us. This is true strength, the ability to let go, to release our grip on the stories and emotions that bind us, and to find peace in the present moment. Releasing attachment to thoughts and opinions. The teachings on non-attachment extend beyond emotions. They also apply to our thoughts and opinions. We all have opinions about the world, about others, and about ourselves. We have ideas about what is right, what is wrong, and how things should be. But these opinions, too, can become a source of suffering. When we attach ourselves to our opinions, we begin to view the world through a narrow lens. We become trapped in the belief that our way of thinking is the only correct one. We feel anger when others challenge our views, and we become defensive when someone disagrees with us. The Buddha taught that wisdom comes from letting go of rigid opinions and opening our minds to the impermanence of all things. By releasing attachment to our opinions, we can approach life with greater openness and understanding. We can listen to others without judgment and recognize that our views are not fixed, but constantly evolving. This is a key aspect of non-attachment, the ability to observe our thoughts and opinions without clinging to them. One of the Buddha's most famous teachings is the Four Noble Truths, which point to the reality of suffering, its causes, and the path to liberation. The second noble truth teaches that suffering arises from craving and attachment. Our desire for things to be a certain way creates suffering, because we are attached to outcomes that are beyond our control. When we let go of our attachments to specific outcomes, we can begin to experience peace, regardless of the circumstances. Practical steps toward non-attachment. Now that we understand the theory behind non-attachment, how can we begin to practice it in our daily lives? The Buddha offered practical steps to help us detach from the things that cause us suffering. Here are a few ways to start. 1. Practice mindfulness. The first step in overcoming attachment is to become aware of our thoughts and emotions. When we practice mindfulness, we learn to observe our thoughts without identifying with them. We begin to see them for what they are: temporary mental events that arise and pass away. By observing our thoughts with equanimity, we can begin to detach from them and let go of the stories they create. To let go of the need to control, non-attachment requires us to let go of the need to control every aspect of our lives. We cannot control other people's actions, the future, or even the present moment. When we let go of our need to control, we open ourselves to the flow of life and allow things to unfold naturally. 3. Embrace impermanence. One of the key teachings of Buddhism is that all things are impermanent. Everything in life changes, and nothing lasts forever. By embracing impermanence, we learn to let go of our attachment to things, people, and experiences. We understand that change is inevitable, and we can find peace in accepting this truth. 4. Practice compassion. Non-attachment does not mean that we become indifferent or cold. On the contrary, it allows us to act with greater compassion. When we are not attached to outcomes, we can act selflessly, without expectation of reward or recognition. We can help others, not because we want something in return, but because it is the right thing to do. 5. Meditate on letting go. Meditation is one of the most effective ways to practice non-attachment. When we meditate, we can focus on letting go of the things that we are holding onto. We can visualize releasing our attachment to certain thoughts, desires, or emotions. And we can experience the freedom that comes with letting go. Call to action. As you reflect on these teachings, I encourage you to begin practicing non-attachment in your own life. Notice the things you are clinging to, whether it's a past regret, a desire for control, or a fixed opinion, and gently let go of them. Remember, non-attachment does not mean rejection, but liberation. By releasing our grip on the things that bind us, we can experience true freedom and peace. Take a moment now to think. What can you let go of today? What thoughts, emotions, or desires are you holding onto that are causing you suffering? Begin by releasing them, and notice the space that opens up in your heart and mind. This space is where true peace resides. You are not your thoughts, your emotions, or your possessions. You are the awareness that observes them. And in that awareness, you will find the freedom and peace that the Buddha taught us to seek. Start your journey today, and experience the liberation that comes from non-attachment. Conclusion: a mind unburdened. As we conclude today's exploration of the mind and its role in our suffering, it becomes evident that the key to true peace does not lie in the relentless pursuit of controlling every thought or emotion we experience. Instead, it lies in understanding the nature of the mind itself. It is through mindfulness and the practice of non-attachment that we are able to free ourselves from the mental prison that keeps us trapped in cycles of suffering. Think for a moment. How often do we let our minds carry us into distressing thoughts, whether about the past, the future, or imagined scenarios? We believe that we are our thoughts, that we are the stories we tell ourselves. But in reality, we are not our thoughts. We are the ones who observe them. And therein lies the key to liberation. The Buddha's teachings are clear. The path to peace is not achieved through force or suppression of the mind, but through awareness and understanding. When we understand that thoughts are impermanent, fleeting like clouds passing across the sky, we no longer allow them to define us. We can begin to detach from the stories our minds create. This awareness, this deep understanding, allows us to break free from the endless cycles of craving, fear, and suffering. In this space, peace emerges not as something we chase after, but as something that was always present within us, waiting to be discovered. The practice of mindfulness and non-attachment. Mindfulness is at the heart of this journey. It is through the regular practice of mindfulness that we begin to observe our thoughts without judgment. We don't need to change them or make them go away. We simply need to witness them as they come and go. Just like watching the waves on the ocean. We notice the thoughts rise and fall, without getting swept away by them. Non-attachment further deepens this practice. It allows us to recognize that we do not need to cling to any particular thought or emotion. When we let go of our attachment to thoughts, whether they are positive or negative, we free ourselves from the mental prison we have built. This doesn't mean we stop caring or stop acting in the world. But it means we stop allowing our sense of self to be defined by our thoughts. We no longer need to hold tightly to them, because we realize that they don't determine our worth or our happiness. The true peace within. When we begin to observe our thoughts with awareness and allow them to come and go, we make room for a deeper, quieter presence within ourselves. It is in this quiet space, behind all the noise of the mind, that we can experience true peace. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances or on the cessation of all thoughts. Rather, it is found in our ability to sit with the thoughts without becoming entangled in them. Even amidst the restlessness of the mind, we can find stillness. The Buddhist teachings are a reminder that true freedom comes not from controlling the mind but from understanding it. And as we understand it more deeply, we begin to loosen the grip it has on us. Through mindfulness, non-attachment, and awareness, we discover that we are capable of experiencing peace and clarity at any moment, regardless of the mental storm that might swirl around us. A call to reflect and act. So, I invite you to ask yourself, are you ready to free yourself from the mental prison you've created? Are you prepared to let go of the thoughts and mental patterns that no longer serve you, and embrace the peace that's always been available to you? The journey of mindfulness and non-attachment begins with a simple step. The decision to observe your thoughts without judgment, without trying to control them. Start today. Every time you notice your mind racing, simply observe. Don't engage, don't react, just notice. This is the beginning of liberation. Remember, true peace does not come from the absence of thoughts, but from the freedom to simply watch them pass without getting caught in them. If this video resonated with you, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Stories, where we continue to explore more Buddhist teachings and practices that help you cultivate peace and mindfulness in your life. Our journey doesn't end here, and we want to walk it together with you. Let us know in the comments. What mental patterns are you struggling with? Which thoughts or emotions do you find yourself clinging to? How are you working to release them? Share your thoughts with us, and let's create a community where we can learn and grow in mindfulness together. What's next? As we continue this journey, we'll dive even deeper into how Buddhist teachings can help us navigate the challenges of modern life. Next time, we'll explore how to handle difficult emotions such as anger and fear, and how mindfulness can provide the tools to transform them. Are you ready to unlock the full potential of your mind and experience the peace that lies beyond the thoughts? Stay tuned, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll never miss another transformative video from Buddhist Stories. Until then, remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. And that awareness is the key to true freedom.